Senator Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Negus. What will the AFP's involvement be with the
Sorry, Senator, I can't hear you because the microphone's turned the other direction.
Sorry, I apologise. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Negus. What will the AFP's involvement be with the operation of Sri Lankan officials using the 2 boats that Australia has just given to Sri Lanka?
Virtually none, Senator. We have, as you know from previous questioning, we have an officer based in Sri Lanka who's a liaison point, but we do not have any formal or informal relationship with the Navy.
So when you say virtually none, could you just expand on that, please? Because I understood that you would be advising, that you do advise Sri Lankan officials involved in potential people smuggling. So I'm trying to understand how this will work.
That's right, Senator. We have a relationship with the Sri Lankan police, but we don't have a relationship with the Sri Lankan military.
So I understood from previous responses to questions that you had identified that you have been able to gain intelligence to stop people leaving Sri Lanka by boat. So if that's the case, how will you be interacting?
Senator, the reason I said virtually none is because if there was information gathered by the Navy, that could be passed to the police, which would be passed to us, but we don't have a direct relationship with the Navy per se.
So is it correct, if I'm understanding you correctly, you say you don't have a relationship with the Sri Lankan Navy, but information you supply to Sri Lankan police could then go on to the Navy who are using the 2 boats?
Well, that's a supposition, I suppose. I mean, I might pass to the Deputy Commissioner Phelan just to tell you a bit more detail about the role of the liaison officer we have in Sri Lanka, but it's a very carefully controlled one, as we've said before.
Thank you, Senator. The relationship that we do have with the Sri Lankans is all of our information exchanges through our liaison officer in Colombo, and works very closely with the anti-people smuggling teams within the police in Sri Lanka. And obviously there are a number of ways that disruptions can occur, onshore and offshore. If the local authorities determine that information needs to be passed for offshore interdiction through their Navy, then I would have thought it was a natural consequence of the actions that information would be passed.
Thank you. Do you have an officer in Sri Lanka called Mr Pong, or a name like that, P-O-N-G?
Not that I know of, no.
I'll come back to that one, thank you. I understand that tomorrow a 22-year-old Tamil who's currently held in Brisbane, a Brisbane detention centre, will be flown back to Sri Lanka, and that a 19-year-old Tamil man was sent back last week, and that he has already been beaten when he was put in prison in Sri Lanka. Could you share with us how you monitor, or do you follow up on any cases of abuse of people who are returned from Australia to Sri Lanka?
Is this your role, or is that some other agency?
Yeah, Mr Chair, I was just about to say, I mean, that's not a role for the AFP. I mean, certainly in the course of our duties, if we would come across allegations of that sort, we would pass those to DFAT and to the appropriate agencies in respect of that, whether it be Department of Immigration or others. So we do not have a monitoring role in country. We are purely a liaison role. We do not have any police powers in Sri Lanka. We pass intelligence from one agency to the other, and that's really the extent of it.
Thank you.
Could you perhaps just tell us what you think the reaction might be if you were to start making an inquiry as a police force in another country about how people were being treated?
We don't have any powers to do that, and certainly you can imagine if police agencies from other countries came to Australia and started conducting their own inquiries here, how the community and the government and ourselves as police agencies might respond. It just wouldn't be tolerated.
Thank you.
Have you been given any briefs about cases of abuse or torture by Sri Lankan government officials, or has that been supplied to you in any way from non-government groups? Have you been given any information?
Senator, in the past, I think we've answered some questions on notice to yourself that some matters have been referred to the AFP in relation to potential war crimes, etc., and mistreatment, so yes.
Thank you. I'd like to go to the case of Lieutenant Commander and I apologise if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, Sanjeewa Anatuga. And what was the last time, well, has the AFP had contact with this Lieutenant Commander, and if so, what was the last time that you had contact with him?
I think you're referring to the gentleman that was in the press in the last
Yes.
week or so. The AFP's had no contact with that person at all.
The Sydney Morning Herald described Christopher Wood, who was involved in this case, as being an advisor to the AFP. Is that correct?
Well, Christopher Wood is our liaison officer.
So
in
he's
Colombo.
actually an AFP member, a police officer based in Sri Lanka. He's an advisor to the Sri Lankan police force on those issues in its broadest sense, but as I said, it's a liaison role where he would liaise with them and pass intelligence back and forwards.
But so I'd just like to clear this up, and maybe I've misunderstood. I thought that you just said that you'd had no AFP officer or anybody employed by you has had any relationship with the Lieutenant Commander. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, that's what yes.
So,
That's my advice, Senator.
So, with regard to Christopher Wood, could you just say what his position is with the AFP, please?
He's the senior liaison officer in Colombo.
Right. And so, are you saying that he didn't meet with the Lieutenant Commander, but that he was able to collect information that exposed this people smuggling incident?
No,
Is
I
that
didn't
what
say
happened?
anything about the latter, but on the first point, my advice is that we've had no contact with that person whatsoever.
Okay, so could you explain that how Christopher Wood undertook his work that has led to this exposure, this investigation of Mr. Anatoga, and I understand that he was interrogated in custody by him?
Right?
Are you aware of this Sydney Morning Herald article that the Senator's referring to?
Only broadly, Mr. Chair. I haven't read the article myself, so I
Well, I was
haven't,
just
got,
going
I
to
haven't got
say,
it before me. Would be handy.
Do you agree or disagree with it? That might be the starting point. It
that's-
sounds to me like you disagree with it, but you haven't seen it.
Well, that's right.
Mr. Chair.
I'm just trying to be
well,
helpful. Well, I mean, it's no
Well,
good.
can let them answer the questions?
Okay.
So I'm trying to ascertain, because the articles does say that the advisor to the AFP, which I think you've established that that's the case, that Christopher Wood was involved in the investigation of Anatoga and has interrogated him in custody.
Senator,
Well,
do you have? Could we get a copy of that article and give it to the officers? That might speed things up and help you get a better answer.
I think they're aware of it, so I'm happy to continue with the questions, and while we're speaking, I'm sure an article will arrive and we can go into it in more detail. So could you just spell that out, please?
Well, certainly, Senator. Well, for a start, not everything that's in the newspaper is truthful.
No, that's why I'm asking the
but
questions.
as I'll go back to what I said before, my advice is that our officer has had no contact with that person at all.
So that statement that Christopher Wood was involved in the investigation and has interrogated him is incorrect.
Well, you used the word "and" in there. I didn't say. I said he has not interrogated him. He hasn't spoken to him at all. We've had no contact with him. As to what involvement we may have had in relation to passing information and working with the Sri Lankan police authorities, I'd have to take that on notice.
Okay, so I'll separate. So I was just giving you the full quote, so we'll separate that out so I clarify. So Christopher Wood did interrogate him. Christopher Wood investigated Anatoga, but you're saying he didn't interrogate him.
No, I didn't even affirm to the first part. I need to take that on advice, Senator. But in terms of the second part, I think for now the fifth time, my advice is we've had no contact with that person at all.
So you're saying no AFP person has had anything to do. So, okay, I think we've got to spell it out. No AFP person has actually met him directly or asked him questions.
That's what I said, yes.
Right. Okay. So therefore, can we go back to the investigation? Can you share any information with us at all about the investigation that's been undertaken by the AFP of Anatoga?
No, I'd have to take that on notice, but we don't do investigations in Sri Lanka, Senator. We pass information to Sri Lankan police as a normal course of action, but in relation to this particular matter, I'd have to take that on notice to absolutely accurately give to you what our involvement was, if any at all.
So you are leaving it open that there could have been an investigation?
I think I've said that.
Okay, it's just we have to pin it down. That's all we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly I'll reiterate again, Senator, no investigation by the AFP. We don't investigate offshore.
So no investigation. So Mr Wood, because I thought you said you were taking it on notice, so you're now saying that neither Christopher Wood or any other AFP person investigated Anatoga.
What I said, I think I said, I have to read this back if necessary. What I take on notice is I would find out exactly what involvement we did have, if anything, in relation to the investigation that occurred in Sri Lanka. I'm not saying we investigated it all, but what involvement we may have had, whether it was post the fact or even before the fact.
And can before the fact include any police work which led to the arrest of Mr Anatoga?
Yes, certainly, Senator.
Have you worked with any other Australian government departments on this issue?
I'd have to take that on notice as well, Senator, on exactly the same bounds as we did before.
Considering this is an issue that's been in the news considerably, wouldn't have you come here with a great deal of detail to share with the committee about what actually happened? It just seems surprising you've got to take so much on notice when it's a very big issue and you're before estimates this week.
Well, I think some of the questions you asked are very narrow, Senator, and I want to be very careful that I don't mislead the Senate in terms of my answers. So as I've come to this forum for many, many years now, I try and impart as much information as I possibly can to the Senate. And it certainly, in terms of, I reiterated before, we've had no direct contact with this person, but in terms of what involvement we did have, if any, in relation to the circumstances that led to his charging or detention or whatever form that took, I'd much rather we be accurate with the information rather than guess.
Senator, can I just add something now? I've just got the article in front of me now on the iPad. I mean, the sentence starts by saying, Mr Christopher Wood, an advisor to the AFP. That is an inaccurate statement and is clearly incorrect. Now, what follows from there says he was involved in the investigation and interrogated the person whilst in custody. The fact that they didn't know he was a member of the AFP, but they've got him down as an advisor, it would be highly irregular and highly unusual for an AFP officer in another country to be involved in any form of interview, let alone interrogation, of a suspect on any offence. So that's why I think Mr Phelan's absolutely right that the questions you're asking presume a level of involvement which I think would be highly unusual, and we have not been briefed about anything like this as to the AFP's involvement offshore, and I'd be very surprised, and we'll correct the record if that's not the case, but very, very surprised if his involvement went any further than just being an information conduit between the Sri Lankan police and the Australian police.
Thank you for that information, Mr Negus. So are you saying at this point you're not actually sure of Mr Wood's position within the AFP or relationship with the AFP?
No, I know what his position in the AFP is. He's a police officer, a sworn police officer who's a senior liaison officer in Colombo, Sri Lanka, has been for a number of years. The article quotes him as being an advisor to the Australian Federal Police. He is not. He is a sworn AFP officer, has been the liaison point there for a couple of years, and that's the first inaccuracy. Now, whether as I said, it would be highly unusual for him to be involved in any interrogation or interview offshore. So I suspect the rest of that article is also inaccurate, but we will double check that because we haven't got any advice to suggest the negative, but what you're proposing is a fairly strong positive.
Thank you. So we're clear in terms of what we're taking on notice. If you could take on notice to identify the inaccuracies in that article on November the 15th in the Sydney Morning Herald by Ben Doherty.
It might be easier to identify the accuracies.
Well, I think maybe the AFP would like to take your question on notice as well, Mr Chair. Mr Negus, what mechanisms does the AFP have in place to ensure that they are not inadvertently supporting Sri Lankan officials that may be engaged in people smuggling?
Well, Senator, when our officers are offshore, they are very clear on what their obligations, where they start and where they finish. As I said, they have no sworn powers. They are not to be involved in any investigation in country. They are work in the consulate with, or the embassy, as it may be, with DFAT, and again, they report back to us on their actions on a weekly, monthly basis or on a needs basis. So they are not involved in any activities which wouldn't be supported by the AFP.
So you don't have any special measures in place for Sri Lanka that you wouldn't have in place for a country where there's no people who are regularly leaving there to seek asylum? There's no special measures to ensure things don't happen in
the standards we apply are across the board, and they are set very high. These people undergo a significant amount of training before they're deployed. They understand that they represent this country and the actions that they undertake offshore, and are ambassadors in that way for this nation and for the organisation. So they are restricted in what they can do and understand clearly what they can do.
Has AFP given DFAT a briefing about Mr Anatagoda since the arrest?
No, we haven't.
Thank you. There was a Freedom of Information document that came out, was cleared on September 2012, and it's headed Attorney General's meeting with His Excellency Admiral Samarasinha. And in the second page of it, where it has item and key issues, it states, the AFP enjoys continued support and cooperation from key operational level contacts in the Sri Lankan Police Service, including Criminal Intelligence Division elements. Could you outline what kinds of opportunities would lead to joint operations?
I'm sorry, Senator, you'd have to read that out again. It was a long paragraph that I lost the train of halfway through.
The AFP enjoys continued support and cooperation from key operational level contacts in the Sri Lankan Police Service, including Criminal Intelligence Division elements. So my question was, what kind of opportunities would lead to joint operations?
Well, the exchange of intelligence, which could lead to the interdiction of people smugglers, whether they be in Sri Lanka or in Australia, or anywhere in between.
So the SLPS might share information with you and you might share information with them. It goes both ways.
That's right, under appropriate protocols, yes.
So can you share with us some details of joint operations that have happened in the past that you would be able to disclose?
Senator, we don't have anything in front of us. I'm just seeing whether one of the deputies might recall an example of this in dealing with the Sri Lankan authorities.
I was just trying to understand how it would work and if it was also done with any other Sri Lankan government departments as well as the SLPS.
No, well, as I said at the very start, and I think I've said it 3 times now, we do not have relationships with other government departments in Sri Lanka other than the police. We work through very strict protocols in regards to how we exchange intelligence and what we do. And joint operations is probably an overstatement in the context of exchanging intelligence and working with them to try and disrupt people smuggling operations, whether they be in Sri Lanka, on the water, or anywhere in between here and there.
So that, when you've just said that joint operations might be an overstatement, that was a briefing for the Attorney General. It says it was cleared on September 2012. The date's been taken out. So are you saying that that's actually inaccurate or an overemphasis? Are you...
Well, we do joint operations with a range of countries around the world where we have partnership arrangements and we have people co-located together and we are investigating particular issues in a true joint operational stance. But the sorts of exchanges that take place in that Sri Lankan environment, is my understanding, is it's very much that intelligence exchange, and we might work with them on elements of that. But I don't recall, and the deputies can correct me if I'm wrong, us having Sri Lankan officers working in this country, or vice versa, and the fact that how we've done that.
So could you take it on notice? My question was referring to Sri Lanka because it says joint operations and I was assuming that was in Sri Lanka. Could you take it on notice if you can supply any examples of
Yes,
those?
Senator, and I will take that on notice, but I've just spoken to Deputy Commissioner Colvin, who's in charge of this area for the last 3 years, and he can't recall something that would be characterised in the way I think you're perceiving it.
If
we'll take it on notice and come back to you.
If you can't recall, but when I hear those words, it always reminds you, it sounds like it needs to be taken on notice, so you've got time.
Happy to take it on notice,
Thanks.
but as I said, just to give you an indication and to temper perhaps your expectations, we can't recall that from
Okay.
for the last 3 years.
Get
Senator
you.
Rhiannon, you've been going 20 minutes now. If you've got some other quick
Can I ask one more?
quick questions, yes,
Thank you.
and then I'll go to others and I'll come back to you if there's time.
Okay, thank you very much. What was the total AFP budget for the Sri Lankan operations in the last two financial years and then the one coming, please?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. The budget that I've got here for the total for 2013-14 is 350,000, and for the previous year, 12-13, was 540,000, and before that, I haven't got the year before. Happy to take that on notice.
Right, and that's the total AFP budget for your Sri Lankan operations?
That would be that's our operational budget, and then of course you've got the salaries of our people, a person that's there. You've got the cost of accommodation and all those sort of things in country, allowances, etc., which I'm happy to take on notice to get an exact figure for you for those 3 years.
Okay, if you can give me the total figure for that, that'd be good.
Certainly.
And within that, can you give breakdown of the expenditures by programs that you're doing in that country?
It would probably pretty much be one program, Senator, but we'll do as best we can for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, just before we do move off that, I asked somebody to ring our officer in Sri Lanka, Mr Woods, who's an AFP member, just for the record. He has had no involvement or contact with the investigation that was alleged in that article, so that's directly from Mr Federal Agent Chris Woods, working in Sri Lanka. If I could clarify that.
Thanks, Mr Negus, and thanks very much for that prompt attention to that particular detail. I did say I'd go to Senator Seselja, but Senator Singh has only a couple of questions, so I might go to her